Hi, my name is Daniel Ray. Come along with me as we have, or we try to have, an impossible conversation. Primarily because I'm not there and you're not here, but you can yell at the screen if you want to, or talk to the screen, or whatever you do. But come along and let's have an impossible conversation. James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian are outspoken atheists. In 2015, James wrote a book called Everybody is Wrong About God. And in 2013, Peter Boghossian wrote the book A Manual for Creating Atheists. So if you combine James's book with Peter's book, you kind of get the idea of where impossible conversations are headed, at least the foundational groundwork behind the author's worldview is atheism. Now, some people will say atheism isn't a worldview. Some people say atheism is just a lack of a belief. Other people say atheism is a philosophical position that needs evidence and can be evidenced. And so whatever your take on atheism is, I only point this out to show you what the underlying assumptions are about the two authors. So, what is good about the book? There are some good things about how to have impossible conversations. They offer many different conversational techniques regarding civility, self-reflection, and how to have conversations about difficult, important, and controversial topics. They emphasize teamwork, that you and the other person that you're talking to can cultivate agreement by working together rather than seeing each other as two opposing sides. Find the common ground between you and the person you're talking to, and establish cooperativeness and teamwork. I think that's an excellent suggestion. And I think the book is good because it causes you to examine your beliefs. Test what you believe. Ask yourself why you believe what you believe. Why do you believe what you believe? How do you know what you believe? As the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves, or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test. So it's biblical to examine yourself and see whether or not you're in the faith. But of course, Paul is giving us a ground by which we can test whether or not we are in the faith, and that standard is the person and the work of the Lord Jesus Christ. You will encounter a multitude of different terms in the book: epistemology, morality, God, faith, doubt. They deal with anger issues, some psychology. They talk about evidence. They talk about knowledge. They talk about empiricism. There are many different terms, philosophical, theological, epistemological terminology throughout the book. And though they are in there, the book is an easy read. You can understand basically where they're coming from. This book has become widely popular among those who call themselves street epistemologists. And if you haven't watched my first video on street epistemology, you can go do that now. But this book was written in 2019, and it's become sort of the gospel of street epistemologists. They've kind of moved away from a manual for creating atheists, but now this book is what a lot of them go by. And in fact, as I was reading this book for the first time this week, I saw many things that street epistemologists have used in conversations with me, almost verbatim sometimes. And so this is a book that a lot of street epistemologists now use and draw from. So what are some good things in there? They encourage empathy. It encourages understanding your interlocutor, the person you're talking to. It encourages listening. It encourages us to build rapport with the people that we're communicating with, and it cultivates this idea and necessity of trust. All of these things are essential for having good quality conversations. It is possible to go from this to this. I totally agree. And so would a lot of street epistemologists. You can get someone from an angry, clenched fist, closed sort of position to a position of agreement. It is possible. Of course, we probably disagree on why it's possible. As a Christian, I believe, as God says in the Gospel of Matthew, with God, all things are possible. And so as Christians, we have impossible conversations all the time because we are talking to people that find the resurrection of Jesus foolish. They think the scriptures, they don't have an understanding of the scriptures, or they do, or they mock it. And so constantly, I am involved constantly in discussions with people, mostly atheists, about the Christian faith. So I know what it means to have impossible conversations, and I can agree with Peter and James about the kinds of things that you need in order to have a good conversation, in order to engage in an impossible conversation. And so my experience, I can resonate with a lot of what they say from the Christian side of things. One example is I am a co-moderator of the Atheist and Christian Book Club, a once-a-month club. We now meet on Zoom, where we have an atheist guest one month and a Christian guest one month, and we discuss different books from different topics. And so I moderate that. We have atheists and Christians in the discussion. It's a very pleasant and civil exchange. And so a lot of what they say, a lot of what James and Peter say in this book, I agree with, and I've seen utilized in practice, and I myself have done a lot of these things. But it's not easy. Yet Paul says, the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 4:8, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is true, whatever is noteworthy, whatever is of good repute, think on these things. Let your mind dwell on these things. And remember, the Apostle Paul went to Mars Hill and the Areopagus and talked to the pagan philosophers. And he used their literature in order to bridge that gap between what they understood and the resurrection of Jesus. And so Paul took their literature and understood what they were talking about and explained the gospel to them through the literature that they had. And I think that's one thing that you can do with a book like this, is find out what's good, find some common ground, find out the things you agree with, and build a bridge and build rapport based on the things that you have in common with this, with what's written in this book. It's pretty much the Socratic method: asking questions, being civil, engaging in deeper questions. Why do you believe this? Why do you believe that? So there's a lot of good things in here. There's a multitude of different techniques and ideas that they give you. I'm not going to cover all of them here, but I can kind of summarize them here. Keep calm, listen, work to know and accurately restate the other's position. Say and instead of but. I really like that. Somebody says something and you go, well, yeah, but. Instead of saying yeah, but, you can say, well, yes, and this too. And I really like that. Don't try to be a counselor. They said this once or twice. If you're not a psychologist, don't do a psychological evaluation of the person you're talking to. Recognize emotions, anger, where identity ideas come into play, and morality concepts. Be cognizant of these difficult issues. Be aware of them and where they can lead you. And of course, know when to walk away from a difficult discussion. There's no harm in that. They also emphasize and exhort us to try not to win an argument, but to understand the other person. I totally agree. Don't get personal, even though sometimes it does happen. Christians and atheists both. Don't get personal. There's no need to do that. Don't assume the other person has negative intentions. Model respect. Don't push or force a conversation. Cultivate teamwork and partnerships. Be courteous and thankful. Just very common, everyday, common sense ideas. And they offer good tips and advice about how to negotiate difficult conversations on social media as well. So there are many good common sense approaches and techniques for having good conversations mentioned in this book. So double thumbs up for all of those things in there on which we can agree. Now let's get into the meat of where we might disagree. And the readers are referred to as interventionists. The word intervention is mentioned several times. And of course, when you hear the word intervention, you think, of course, intervening in a dangerous situation or in a situation that's not good. I'm going to come in and I'm going to intervene. I'm going to help. I'm going to correct. I'm going to guide. I'm going to lead. And so throughout the book, Peter and James are referring to the readers as the practitioners of how to have impossible conversations as interventionists, people who intervene in another's cognitive processes. So that term appears quite frequently. And one place where interventionist appears is on page 107. And this term, interventionist, reminded me of Peter's 2013 book and the term street epistemologist. And that's kind of, I see a similarity between those two terms. Now, if you've ever encountered someone who is a street epistemologist or who does go by this book here and might consider themselves an interventionist, they're not going to say this up front. These are not terms that which they will lead. They're not going to say, hi, I'm an interventionist, I'm here to fix your cognitive processes. Hi, I'm a street epistemologist, and I'm here to correct your bad thinking. They're not going to say that, but that's kind of the gist of where this book is coming from. So there are 5 chapters and 5 levels of intervention techniques. They include the beginner, the intermediate, the advanced, the expert, and the master interventionist. And these are all outlined in the 5 different chapters, and each of them has varying levels of different techniques and tips for how to have impossible conversations. So the master interventionist is, by the end of the book, if you've been practicing this, the master interventionist has the tools to talk to what the authors call ideologues. And they define an ideologue as one who is unwilling or unable to revise their moral beliefs. And this definition is found on page 157. Not surprisingly and somewhat disappointingly, they put religious believers into this category. Basically, if you have a faith-based belief system, you're an ideologue, and I'm here to intervene and help you. Now, they don't say that, but that's the implication. Every street epistemologist that I've ever engaged or that I've ever seen engage other people on videos or whatever have been atheists. Their primary goal has been to cause doubt in believers. This remains a key goal for a lot of people who practice street epistemology. It remains a fundamental key goal to get theists, and oftentimes more specifically Christians, to doubt and eventually give up their Christian faith. This book is also, not so subtly, a counter-apologetics book. And how do I know that? Well, the big things come up in this book. Now, you think about the overarching goal of this book is to give people tips about how to have impossible conversations. But throughout the book, you'll see things like the creation-evolution discussion, Noah's flood, slavery in the Bible, holy book language, the resurrection, and evangelism. They'll bring up these things as examples for conversational techniques. Here's an example of how this technique can be employed, but when they bring up examples, it's always, not always, but a lot of times it's painting Christianity in a very negative light, or subtly or not so subtly. Some of the examples they give are inherently negative and predisposed to sort of put down Christianity. So in other words, the atheism does come out throughout the book. You can see it. One quote specifically is what they say about evangelism on page 116. They believe evangelism is ethically vulgar. On page 100, they're talking about creationism, and they mention this. Quote, the evidence for evolution is absolutely overwhelming and scientifically uncontroversial. This is found on page 100. Now you have to stop and ask yourself, why is this in a book about conversation techniques? Why mention that the evidence for evolution is overwhelming? Well, it's a counter-apologetic pebble in the shoe. These little snippets that come up, this one about evolution and creation, is a pebble of doubt. They're just planting this seed. If a theist is reading this and they oh my gosh, maybe evolution is true, maybe I should look into that. It's a pebble in the shoe, trying an attempt to cause doubt. But the way in which Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay give that sentence about evolution, one wonders, are they open to changing their minds about the evidence regarding evolution? Because there have been a lot of academics and non-Christian academics, intellectuals, who are questioning Darwin's paradigm. Yale computer scientist David Gelernter changed his mind about evolution recently, and atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel believes that the neo-Darwinian concept of nature is almost certainly false. So I bring this up not to try to disprove evolution, but to ask the question, how would an interventionist or street epistemologist categorize these non-Christian intellectuals for their criticism of neo-Darwinian evolution? There is dissent in academia about exactly how it's explained and what can be explained and what can't be explained. There is, for example, absolutely no evolutionary theory for how language developed or what the evolutionary constructs of the mind and the intellect and consciousness are.
But there are also prominent people who have taken their atheism to the public successfully, who are crusading atheists, who preach atheism in an aggressive way as a consequence of science. They play on people's weakness and ignorance, and so far as most people don't take the trouble to learn science, it's easy for a scientist to say, I'm smarter than you are because I know it and you don't. You know, I understand the genome and you don't. I understand physics. I can do hard calculus problems and not just 12th grade level ones. So you can see how much smarter I am than than you are. And when I tell you there are no moral absolutes and religion is trash, and furthermore, we ought to go ahead with human cloning, we should go ahead with genetic engineering and implants of all sorts, which will smudge the line between human and machine, we're getting into a moral conflict of interest, which is tremendously dangerous.
So another pebble in the shoe is a little bit more subtle, not so subtle if you're paying attention. But other examples, aside from some Christian ones that they use, other examples include hostage negotiation, criminal rehabilitation, an example with the Iranian nuclear program, they mentioned slavery, and of course, in all of that is Christianity and religion. And so by the end of the book, I'm left thinking that Christianity and religion are sort of like crisis mode, like a hostage situation, or like a criminal in need of being rehabilitated in critical thinking, or the Iranian nuclear program, or slavery, or something like that. At the end of this, if you're a skeptic, you get the idea that Christianity is just as bad as being in a hostage situation, and that you need to go out and find your Christian friends and help them escape from the shackles of a faith-based belief system. And that's the impression that this book left me, given the way that they interspersed Christian examples with all of these other ones, that Christianity is some kind of crisis from which people need to be saved, and here we are, the interventionists, coming to rescue you with logic, reason, and epistemology. And that's kind of the gist of the book. But that's another pebble in the shoe, that how the light in which Christianity is portrayed. What seems to be underlying their foundational epistemology about religious belief is that religious belief is a kind of knowledge or a kind of belief without evidence. On page 117, under the heading of epistemological questions, you find this sentence: then the belief is not held on the basis of evidence. And so this seems to be what Peter Boghossian was talking about in 2013 in his manual for creating atheists, that faith in God, belief in God, religion, Christianity is all a belief system without any kind of substantial objective evidence. This is implied empiricism, and I dealt with empiricism in the other video. Basically, it seems that they're suggesting, maybe not suggesting, maybe they actually believe this, that the only kind of true knowledge, the only kind of knowledge that is allowable is the kind of knowledge that you can test and prove through the tactile empirical senses. So the only kind of true knowledge is the physical kind, like what color is this pen, or how much do I weigh, or how tall am I, or how far away is it to Chicago. The empirical sort of data seems to be the only kind of acceptable evidence that a street epistemologist will accept when you talk about testing for your beliefs. But of course, that kind of knowledge, empiricism as an epistemology, didn't work. It failed in the 20th century because you cannot use empiricism to validate the philosophy of empiricism as an epistemology. In other words, you can't use empiricism to prove a philosophy because a philosophy isn't tactile like a pen or eyeglasses. If there's no tangible physical evidence for what you believe, then you should doubt your beliefs. This seems to be the underlying paradigm of their epistemology when it comes to testing your beliefs. Page 34. The goal of an intervention is to help people become less confident about what they believe, which is where changing someone's mind begins. Their goal is to make you less confident about what you believe. And as we already have seen, given the fact that they're atheists, one of the primary goals is to have you be less confident of your belief in God. On page 34 again, quote, in other words, just by speaking with someone, you'll be able to intercede in their cognitions and give them the gift of doubt. The gift of doubt. And so the whole point of being an interventionist is to induce and give doubt. That's all you're really doing. Here are some conversational techniques, all of which are good, but the goal really is to use these good conversational techniques and begin the process of instilling doubt in people's minds who believe in God.
Excuse me.
And so we see on page 73, this comes out of context of Peter Boghossian's relationship with Phil Vischer, who was the creator of VeggieTales. Phil, of course, is a Christian. And this quote says that even though Peter has spent much of his professional life helping people escape faith-based belief systems, Phil and Peter are friends. This quote shows that Peter's life has been dedicated to helping people escape faith-based belief systems. And so I think that sums up at least Peter's intent in this book, is to use these conversational techniques to help people doubt and get out of their belief in God. Now this is interesting. Page 103, they say, do not turn conversations into debates by giving your conversation partner a reason to defend her beliefs. This is especially true if your goal is to instill doubt. So in other words, if you're trying to get them to doubt, don't let them defend their beliefs. So it seems the goal is not finally honest conversation, but instilling and inducing doubt. And so once more, I mentioned this in the other video, they reintroduce the confidence scale, which so many street epistemologists use. And basically what that is basically they'll ask you the question, how confident are you that your belief in X is true? And then they'll give you a numerical scale. 1 if you're not confident at all, 10 if you're very confident, or sometimes it's a percentage between 1% and 100%. But this confidence scale here is reintroduced in the book. They spend several pages on it. And what's the purpose of it? It's what I addressed in the previous video. The purpose of it is found on page 86. This is pretty remarkable, I think. You now have a discrete metric that tracks your ability to intervene, there's the word again, in someone's cognitions and instill doubt. Now, there it is in black and white. Why is this numerical scale being utilized? As a tool to help the interventionist / street epistemologist instill doubt. You can see they go from a 10 to a 7 or something like that. That's their goal, and that's what this is for. And so many times I have seen and heard and have had it used on myself. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you? And so as I said in the previous video, the best way to counter that is just to say, I'm confident. And even in the book, they mention if somebody doesn't go down the numerical scale road with the conversationalist, to abandon that technique. And so the best thing to do if you encounter this and you don't want to go down that road is just to say, I'm confident that God exists. At the beginning of the book, we're given advice that seems contrary to this instilling doubt. On page 45, it says, quote, "The best questions show you're sincerely interested in exploring answers, as opposed to asking a question to achieve some goal." Now, it would seem that I would agree with that statement, that if you're really interested in a conversation, you just want to learn what the other person believes, and you genuinely want to get to know the other person, and you're interested in what they believe, and you have no necessary agenda. Now, if you're a Christian and you're talking to an atheist, of course Christians want people to come to know who Jesus is. We're not secret about that. But we can have genuine conversations and really get to know people. And I think atheists can too. I'm not saying that no one can have no one is capable of a sincere conversation. Of course we can. But here in this book, it seems like the good conversational tactics are sort of being utilized for the sole purpose of getting people to doubt what they believe. And again on page 45, they advise, don't disguise statements as questions and avoid leading questions that carry an agenda. So it's kind of confusing. They say, well, I would agree with this too. If you don't ask questions, don't hide things in your questions, but ask sincere questions without an agenda. But yet it seems the book's agenda is, here are some tools for conversations that ultimately, hopefully, will lead people, theists, to doubt their faith. The authors talk about disconfirmation examples. And on page 111, they say this, quote, "Examples of wildly implausible disconfirmation conditions held by otherwise sane people abound in the field of theology." Whoa, what does that mean? Well, basically, this is what they do. So they give an example of someone who believes in the resurrection. And the interventionist will ask the question, what would change your mind about Jesus' resurrection? And then the authors say that Christians will make something up that could not possibly come to pass. Show me the bones of Jesus. Well, that doesn't seem like it would ever happen. And so the author suggests that this is a Christian wanting to sound reasonable, but really they're not, because all they're doing is trying to justify their beliefs in the absence of evidence. So the authors say the Christian's beliefs are not, quote, warranted on the basis of evidence, end quote. And so what they're suggesting is that the Christian who says, show me the bones of Jesus, is not being sincere. They're accusing the Christian of being insincere at this point, and that the Christian is merely just trying to find a way to compensate for the missing objective evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And so what James and Peter seem to have done is completely dismiss everything that we have regarding the resurrection of Jesus and just saying there's no evidence. And so whenever a Christian is asked this question, they're already put in an impossible situation by the street epistemologist interventionists who thinks there is no evidence. And so that's a whole nother video about evidence. But the question and the problem here is the way in which these authors have put the Christian into a box. They have assumed the Christian is being insincere. They've assumed the Christian is being defensive. They've assumed the Christian thinks there's no evidence, and they've assumed the fact that there is no evidence. And so all of a sudden the Christian is whittled down into this little box here. Toward the end of the book, for the advice for the master interventionist is to cause doubt in one's moral epistemology. So this really gets into some heavy stuff. But yet they admit on page 177, moral conversations are extremely difficult to navigate. And on page 215 in the footnotes, they say morality is complicated. Engaging one's moral epistemology can be difficult. Morality is desperately complex. And so here they are encouraging the interventionist to cause someone to doubt how they came to their moral beliefs. And yet on the other hand, they're saying morality is incredibly complicated. How do they know that they're planting doubt is the right thing to do? I mean, if you're planting doubt in someone's mind about their moral epistemology, certainly you must have an idea of what kind of morality is the right kind of morality, or what kind of epistemology is the right kind of epistemology. But in the book, we're never told what the right kind of epistemology is, nor are we told what the foundation for morality is. And one thing I found really interesting that they said that, if you encounter someone who is critical of these methods, one answer they give for the reason why someone would be critical of these methods is that, quote, some sort of training that's taught them rehearsed defenses to questions, such as apologetics training in Christianity. So if you're critical of our methods, you must have received some kind of training in Christian apologetics. Why is it training in Christian apologetics? Why not just logic and reason and clear thinking? It's interesting they go right to Christian apologetics as one reason why you might not like our techniques. But I think this brings out the underlying foundation of atheism here. That if you're critical of street epistemology, or if you're critical of interventionist theory as outlined in this book, you must have had some sort of Christian apologetics training. I find that this book seems to fall into the category of rehearsed defenses to questions too, so... In this book, the interventionist is never given clear definitions or explanations for the ground of morality, God, the definition of faith, what the correct epistemology is, what counts as evidence or what would count as evidence for God's existence or for the resurrection, nor are we given any kind of foundation for truth. What is truth? Is it objectively true? Is it real? Is there such a thing as objective truth? It seems like the interventionists, it seems like Peter and James assume something, but they never really tell you what that foundation is for morality, for truth, for anything else. They just, the whole book seems to be built up around the idea of here are some conversational techniques that will cause theists to doubt. These kinds of conversations are not easy. Be ready to give a defense. Know what you believe. Take it slow, examine yourself, study to show yourself approved, know what you're talking about, and have no qualms about that. Disagree with civility. That's what you can do. That's what I'm trying to do, is try to point out some things and disagree on a civil level. You can have disagreement and be civil about it. That's what our Atheist and Christian Book Club does. It's disagreement with civility. Practice kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And so take advantage of their extending the olive branch. You extend it back. Make progress in having civil conversations. So there are some good conversational techniques in this book, but also be aware of the counter-atheist apologetics that I think are in this book as well. And so practice kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, as the Bible says, all to the glory of God. I'm Daniel Ray.